10:15 on Wednesday, February 8th, 2023. This is the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. We're continuing our work on S5, the Affordable Heating Act. Turning this morning to hear from Professor Robert Howard, Professor of Ecology and Environmental Biology at Cornell. So thank you for making the time and joining us remotely. You have many folks in Vermont who have recommended you highly to us. So.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to hear that. And thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm Bob Howarth. I'm a Earth system scientist. I'm not a Vermonter, but I do consider myself a New Englander. I was born in Boston and went to kindergarten through high school in the public school systems in New Hampshire. I'm a graduate of Amherst College, and I got my PhD from MIT and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. I'm a professor at Cornell, and I'm also an adjunct senior scientist at the labs in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. I've worked for decades on the consequences of global climate change, on emissions of methane from the oil and gas industry as a driver of climate change, on the production and use of hydrogen, and on alternative energy policies. And in addition to research and teaching, I've been heavily engaged in energy and environmental policy throughout the last 40 years of my career. Currently, I'm one of 22 members of the New York State Climate Action Council, which is the body charged by law with developing the implementation blueprint, what we call the scoping plan for New York's progressive climate law, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act of 2019. So this morning with you, I want to address the proposal that clean heat credits be given by the state of Vermont for green hydrogen and for renewable natural gas. In my professional opinion, it would be unwise for Vermont to encourage the use of either hydrogen or renewable natural gas for heating of homes and commercial buildings. These uses were debated extensively by the New York Climate Action Council and our advisory panels and subgroups over the last 2 to 3 years. We literally spent hundreds and hundreds of hours debating it and studying it. And in our final scoping plan that the council passed by a vote of 19-3, a little less than 2 months ago, we fully rejected the use of hydrogen for heating of homes. And we discouraged the use of renewable natural gas as well, saying it needed further study. So what's the problem with renewable natural gas? Let me start with biogas. Biogas is a mixture of methane and carbon dioxide. It is what's coming out of landfills. It is what's produced in anaerobic digesters from manure or from wastewater treatment facilities. Biogas itself can be used directly as a fuel. You can burn it. You can produce electricity, preferably from a fuel cell. So what's the difference between biogas and renewable natural gas? Renewable natural gas takes biogas and it processes it to remove most of the carbon dioxide from it. And that's necessary if you want to put it into a pipeline. If you just want to use it on site, there's no real reason to do that. And so in the state of New York, we are purposefully discouraging renewable natural gas. We are encouraging direct use of biogas instead, preferably at the site where it's produced, and preferably not by burning it, but rather using fuel cells for electricity. Why are we discouraging renewable natural gas? Well, again, there's no particular reason to produce renewable natural gas except to put it in a pipeline for delivery. And there are 2 reasons not to. One of which is it takes energy to do the processing. So you're losing useful energy by converting the biogas to renewable natural gas. And secondly, it is not that easy to separate out the carbon dioxide from the methane in the biogas to make renewable natural gas. And a fair amount of the methane slips through the process and is emitted unburned to the atmosphere. And so the methane emissions from renewable natural gas, according to the very latest literature, are extremely high. And we concluded in New York that the greenhouse gas footprint of renewable natural gas is actually greater than if you just use fossil natural gas. So again, we are discouraging it. I want to say just a little bit about Vermont Gas Systems contract with Seneca Metals landfill to use renewable natural gas. I live just 40 miles from the Seneca Metals landfill, and it's the largest active landfill in the state of New York. Activists from across the state have been trying for a long time to close it down. The state is moving to close it down. Our recommendation from the Climate Action Council is indeed that the methane, which is otherwise going to leak out of that facility, be harvested and used. But again, the Climate Action Council implementation plan calls for using that on site, not converting it to renewable natural gas, not putting it into pipelines. And our plan just came out in December, but the State Department of Environmental Conservation is supposed to implement that by regulation by the end of this calendar year. And so I believe that, in fact, that plant will not be allowed to be producing renewable natural gas within the next year. And in case I don't think they should, and I would hate to see the state of Vermont encourage a policy which is at odds with what we're trying to do in New York for our climate goals. Second, what's the problem with hydrogen? And I'm very pleased to see that Vermont is apparently not considering any use of hydrogen, which is made from fossil fuels. That's great. Even with carbon capture, hydrogen from fossil fuels is a really bad idea. And I'm the first author of the first major peer-reviewed synthesis on that, which we published just a year and a half ago. So the clean heat credit being considered in this bill for Vermont is for green hydrogen, and that's hydrogen, as you all know, made from 100% renewable electricity using electrolysis to break down water into hydrogen and oxygen. It's not emitting any carbon dioxide. It's not emitting any methane. That's good. However, hydrogen itself does have a climate impact, and that's underappreciated, I think, by most people. It's not a greenhouse gas, but when it is emitted to the atmosphere, it does two things. It prolongs the amount of time that methane stays in the atmosphere, and so has a effect on increasing global warming. And it increases the input of water vapor into the stratosphere, which is bad for a bunch of reasons, but including climate change. And hydrogen is it's a tiny, tiny molecule. It's the smallest molecule in the universe. It's impossible to control it and use it without having some of it leak unburned into the atmosphere. And so there is a climate consequences from using hydrogen, and you should consider that. In addition, though, to the role of hydrogen as an agent of global warming, there are many other reasons not to put hydrogen into gas pipeline systems and not to use hydrogen for heating of homes and commercial buildings. And these include safety concerns, greenhouse gas emissions, inefficiencies, and high costs to consumers. So let me say just a little bit about safety concerns. Hydrogen is corrosive. You can put it into pipeline systems and containers that are designed for handling it, but it has to be a very high quality stainless steel. If you put it into a normal steel or iron pipeline, such as used for fossil natural gas delivery, it causes the steel and or iron to become more brittle. That increases the risk of catastrophic explosions. It also increases the leakage of methane out of those pipeline systems if you blend the two together. So exactly how much, natural gas industry loves this idea of blending hydrogen in with methane into fossil gas systems. It hasn't actually been done much of anywhere because of safety concerns. The state of California, the California Air Resources Board says it's unwise to put more than 5% hydrogen into a methane delivery system. And that just serves no useful purpose. It actually, if you do that, it would not reduce greenhouse gas emissions at final use by 5% because the hydrogen has a low energy density and it's just diluted out. So it really isn't doing anything at all other than providing a little bit more safety risk. You also have to run the pipelines at higher pressure because the hydrogen has a lower energy density, and that again increases leaks of both hydrogen and methane and risks of catastrophic damage. In terms of inefficiencies, I think we need to think of green hydrogen as it's an expensive resource, it's a precious resource, it's being made from renewable electricity, and as we are in this transition towards a fossil fuel-free future, renewable electricity is still a very scarce resource. Now, if you use that electricity to produce hydrogen and you deliver the hydrogen to a home, say you were able to do it in a a safe stainless steel, high quality pipeline, extraordinarily expensive. But say you were to do it and you were to burn that hydrogen in the home, which by the way, you can't do with the sort of boilers that are in people's homes now. You'd have to buy a new boiler that's hydrogen appropriate for it. But if you were to do so, you would get about 0.45 units of energy for the 1 unit of renewable electricity that you put in. If you instead take that renewable electricity, which again is a scarce resource, and deliver it as electricity to a home and use a high efficiency heat pump of the sort that I'm using to heat my house here in upstate New York today, you get about 6 to 10 times more useful heat energy in the home than by going via hydrogen. So it's a wasteful, costly, inefficient, dangerous process, and the literature is overwhelming on that. As the witness before me said, there are now 34 different independent peer-reviewed studies, all of which saying this is a really, really bad idea. There is not a single independent peer-reviewed paper ever published saying it's a good idea. So the science is extraordinarily clear on that. So in conclusion, based on this science, the New York State Climate Action Council strongly recommended against delivery of green hydrogen through the gas pipeline system. I believe the state will make it illegal in the regulations coming out of our implementation plan by the end of this year. And I urge the state of Vermont to not promote clean heat credits that would promote either the use of renewable natural gas or hydrogen for home heating and use in gas delivery systems. Thank you for the chance to address you via Zoom today, and I'd be happy to handle any questions if you have some.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Senator White.
Thank you, Chairman Bray. Thank you, Professor Howarth, for joining us today via Zoom. So I'm assuming you've had a chance to read the bill.
I have, yes.
Okay, I'm wondering then, because I'm a bit confused by your testimony, because we have a pretty robust analysis of the life cycle emissions and some of the declining intensity scores around carbon in the bill, basically to make sure that we don't have the worst of the worst, the things that you highlighted that would be inefficient or would have the worst carbon intensity. We actually have that as ratcheting down over time with these clean heat credits. So what I'm confused about is, do you feel your concerns are not being addressed with this step down carbon intensity score, particularly looking at page 16 and 17 of the Affordable Heat Act?
My concern would be in the detail as to how those carbon intensities are calculated. And if you were, for instance, to rely on the Federal Department of Energy and the GREET model, which is run out of the National Lab System, that is what the IRA calls for. It's what the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed in Washington calls for. The GREET model is not up to date with the latest science on methane emissions from renewable natural gas. And so, in fact, it assumes they're zero, where there's a large body of literature showing that they are extraordinarily large. So it depends. If you rely on a robust analysis for your calculations and it's based on the latest quality peer-reviewed science, then yes, you have some safeguards in there. But if you rely on federal accounting procedures, then I'd be very concerned.
Okay. Do you feel that the GREET model, which was adapted in Oregon, is not something that we can adapt to reflect some of your concerns?
Yes, it could be used. I mean, the GREET model, my concern is particularly with methane, right? Because methane's a incredibly powerful greenhouse gas. In Vermont, you still look at methane in terms of 100-year global warming potential, which we don't in New York. We require a 20-year global warming potential. And the reason for that is the latest science out of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change shows that the 100-year time period understates the issue from methane. Even if you get the methane emission right, it underplays it by a factor of about 3. So we've adapted in New York. You haven't in Vermont. The federal government hasn't. Oregon hasn't. So that would be one concern I have. The other is actually getting the correct methane emission number. And the GREET model in its default running relies on US EPA official inventory estimates, and those are 5-fold too low for fossil gas compared to what the peer-reviewed literature says, which everyone says. And if you ask the EPA, why do they do that? They say, well, they're forced to rely on industry self-reporting, and that's what industry self-reports. But it's not correct. And so getting the numbers right is critical. And the default numbers in GREET are 100-year global warming potential and industry self-reported methane emission numbers.
And I think what I struggle with a little bit with your testimony is we do actually expand on the GREET model within the bill, and we actually have a more robust and expanded proposal than either the Oregon Clean Fuel Standard or the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard. So I'm wondering, this will be the most restrictive bill from my understanding, when you compare the other two models, when you look at Oregon, when you look at California, we are going further than either of those. So I'm wondering, when you look at your concerns that you have, what those restrictions are that you would recommend that we go further with?
To be honest, I have not studied the detail of your bill in that regard closely enough. I focused in on the use of green hydrogen and renewable natural gas, in part because we've spent so much time debating that in the state of New York, and in part because those are things I'm quite expert in. So I'm not sure I can give you feedback better than what I've done on that. I would just, though, restate that I don't think there's any way to make renewable natural gas in a way that's going to be climate friendly enough. And so if you follow through in your process, in the end, you're going to reach that conclusion too, but it might take you quite a while to get there.
And I don't necessarily sorry, Chairman Frey. And I don't necessarily disagree with that conclusion. I think what I'm most concerned about, is from my vantage point, is both Senator McCormick and I representing the Windsor County District. Our job is to create flexible pathways for our fuel dealers to be able to transition their customers off of fossil fuels. And from my vantage point, this is as close as we can get, as restrictive as we can get, without causing extreme economic shock waves that would hurt the most vulnerable people in our communities. So while I deeply respect your research, from my point of view, this is a compromise that does not create a substantial enough risk to our reduction in carbon, into our potential adoption of these fuels that you're describing, to make me feel that it's not an appropriate bill. So I really respect your testimony, but ultimately come from a different place than I think you might academically, and why I do think this bill does have enough restrictions. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for your kind words. Let me just respond that my belief on this is informed by the 3 years of sitting through hundreds of hours of the Climate Action Council. And we took input from 30,000 individuals and organizations across the state on this. We in New York are not encouraging it because we have determined that it is not in the interest of our customers. So you might have a different view in Vermont, but it's based on more than academic science. It's based on a huge amount of input and debate.
Just to follow up briefly on Senator White's question, that's the Senator Frey. So we are very interested in making sure that the technical advisory group and the analysis work that gets done there is, state of the art. So GREET is really a floor, not a ceiling for us. And we're, I think of this program as being continuously interested in learning and improving. So can you perhaps, I don't know if you have already submitted written testimony that includes information, but I would like to make sure that the more up-to-date research that you folks have been doing in New York State could flow into our process, so we could, jumpstart our own work on this side of the lake.
Yeah, no, I did submit a written statement about 24 hours ago, which includes references to that work. And I'd be happy to follow up with your technical group if they wanted more input on that as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that offer. Senator Watson.
Hello, thank you for your testimony, your time. I just want to come back to the points we were making about hydrogen. I I just want to make sure that I am hearing you correctly on this. I mean, I think with hydrogen, there's a lot of questions about safety, as you brought up. Are there technologies that can store hydrogen safely? And is hydrogen being used currently anywhere in the United States?
Yeah, no, great questions. Yes, the technology to store hydrogen safely certainly exists, but it's expensive, and it's a different technology, different infrastructure than what traditionally has been used for natural gas. So it would require building of a large and expensive infrastructure. In terms of hydrogen use in the United States, hydrogen is widely used in the United States and across the world, and has been for about 130, 140 years, but largely not for energy. It's largely used as a chemical feedstock. It's used in petroleum refining. It's used in making plastics. It's the key product in making synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. It is somewhat used as a fuel, largely rocket fuel. So most space shots use hydrogen.
Sorry, let me clarify my question. I meant used as like a home heating.
No, it's no.
I mean, obviously hydrogen is used in other.
Yeah, no, it has not been used in home heating, as far as I'm aware, anywhere in the United States or anywhere in the world, as far as I'm aware. It's a fairly new idea, and quite frankly, it's an idea that's marketed by a group called the Hydrogen Council that was established in Brussels in 2017, and it was established by British Petroleum, Shell, Total, and ExxonMobil. And so this whole idea of using hydrogen for home heating is the marketing invention of oil and gas industry, and it has not been done before.
Thank you very much.
As we tackle climate change, are there ways of producing hydrogen that seem that are environmentally sound to you, and are there end uses for renewably produced hydrogen that are appropriate?
Yeah, I think the green hydrogen, which is specified in your bill, is as environmentally benign as hydrogen's going to get. As I say, hydrogen itself, if it leaks to the atmosphere, still does contribute to global warming. So we want to use it as carefully as possible. Are there uses for it? Yes, I believe there are. In addition to replacing the fossil hydrogen that we use for chemical feedstocks now, hydrogen can be used to store surplus electricity. If we're producing renewable electricity at rates faster than we can consume them, it's one of the ways we can store it, along with batteries and compressed air, things of that sort. It has a role in making steel in a more environmentally benign way than we do with coal. It may play a role in as an aviation fuel for jet transport, things which are truly difficult to decarbonize. But it's, at the moment, it's a very expensive resource. It's always going to be fairly expensive. And so whenever we can use electricity directly, we're better off doing so, both economically and environmentally.
Thank you. Is it also, I can't remember this, so this is a genuine question. Is it useful in generating electricity, like through a fuel cell?
Yes, yeah, you can definitely use it. So, but if you're producing it from electricity and then producing electricity from it again, it's just a storage, right?
Right.
But yes, you can definitely produce electricity from it, and preferably through a fuel cell. You could also burn it in a turbine, but that's less efficient and more polluting.
Sure, and because it's, as you were mentioning, if we're going to produce more and more energy renewably, one of the things we're, as you know, trying to even out and it's intermittent, to try to decrease the intermittency of it all by if we overproduce, store, and then reproduce electricity.
It can certainly do that. In our New York plan, we suggest that hydrogen might be a role in electricity storage. It's in competition with batteries. There's a bunch of other ways to store it, and we left it up to market forces in New York to decide the best way to go and not specify that it should be hydrogen, but it may be hydrogen. It certainly, hydrogen could play that role technically.
Is it allowed to play that role?
Yes. Green hydrogen is, yes, for that role in New York.
I wanted to double back, please, to biogas. And you were talking about, when you were talking about the surprising high rate of emissions. So are those fugitive emissions from pipeline systems? I mean, it's the handling of it where it's being lost, and is that the troublesome part?
Well, there are fugitive emissions from pipeline systems. We're leaking fossil natural gas methane, right? So if you put renewable natural gas in, that would be the same. But the concern I was trying to raise is that when you process biogas is more or less a 50-50 mix of methane and carbon dioxide. Renewable natural gas is just the methane. You're getting rid of the carbon dioxide. So there are a handful of technologies for doing that processing, but all of them, the process itself emits a fair amount of methane. It's not a perfect separation. And, it may be, I have colleagues who say, well, we'll develop better technologies that will get rid of that problem. And I hope they're right, but so far they haven't. And so the technologies that are here today are quite high methane emitters.
Okay. And I thought I heard you say, but I want to double check that for the Seneca facility, it may be prohibited from selling quote unquote renewable natural gas by state law, or how would that happen?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and so bear with me. And New York lawyers are arguing over New York law at the moment. But our CLCPA, Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act of 2019, lays out climate goals similar to yours: 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions statewide by 2030, be the first one. High emphasis on reducing methane emissions compared to most other state laws. And it set up this group called the Climate Action Council to develop what they call a scoping plan to implement that. So again, I'm one of the 22 members on that. We had to put out our final plan by last December, and we did. Under the law, all state agencies and authorities must, within a year of our producing the plan, promulgate regulations that are consistent with our plan. And our plan specified that we should prefer biogas over renewable natural gas, and that renewable natural gas should be allowed only if there's an extenuating purpose, which could not be met by biogas. So it's now up to the New York agencies over this calendar year to come up with regulations to make that happen. Now, exactly what those will look like, I don't know, but my thought is, certainly our intent in the implementation plan is that the Seneca Meadows plant should not be putting renewable natural gas into pipeline systems which are leaving our state anyway. Now, that's what's happening, and that's inconsistent with our law and our interpretation of it in the implementation plan.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator McCormick.
Thank you for your testimony. Do you have particular recommendations for changes in the text of this draft bill?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch your.
We're
Broke
hearing.
up a little bit there, Ami.
Thank you. We're hearing your testimony in the context of developing Senate Bill number 5.
Right.
You have do you recommend particular language changes in that draft of the bill as we?
Well, I only read your bill quickly and recently. And I was focused on the renewable natural gas and hydrogen issues because that's been brought to my attention by activists in Vermont and elsewhere as a concern, and it is what I work on, and it's what we've been considering in New York. So I would not want to offer you guidance on any aspect of your bill beyond that specifically, but I would urge you not to give renewable heat credits to either renewable natural gas or any hydrogen.
I'm somewhat in a quandary on the issue. So I'm not arguing with you. I want to give you an argument that some people would make just to see how you respond. And it is that there are good policies And then there are policies that are less bad. And this is often fossil-based fuels and so on, are often presented as a lesser of evils. And the old adage is you shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, or even of the pretty good or the good enough. So how bad is this? Or does it make any sense to you at all that as a transition, we would rely on fossil fuels, some fossil fuels, sometimes for a while?
Well, we're not instantly in our society in anywhere in the world, your state or mine, going to go to 100% fossil fuel free world today or tomorrow, right? It has to be a transition. But I do think that all of us, all states should move as quickly as we can away from fossil fuels and as completely as we can. In the implementation plan we have for New York, we will reduce our use of natural gas by 30% by 7 years from now, and cut it in half by about 15 years from now, and cut it virtually to zero by about 2045. Our plan still calls for some fossil fuels even into 2050, because there are some things where the technology just isn't there at the moment to do other than with fossil fuels in some reasonable way. But home heating isn't one of those. It is economically beneficial for anyone to move to heat pumps and away from fossil fuels. It's just it takes time to do it. It takes time to build the infrastructure to get all the heat pumps manufactured and installed. We need a better workforce, et cetera. But the economics, no one would be hurt by making that conversion now if we had the workforce and the manufacturing capacity. In New York, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, thank you. So I just, again, I don't have your submitted testimony in front of me, but if we want to learn more about the provisions you're talking about in the scoping plan, is there a link in the testimony we'll have from you that would connect us to that?
Yes, there is. Yeah, but if you can't find it, please let me know, and I'll work with your staff to provide whatever background you'd like.
Great.
Not today, but within the next day or two.
Thank you. We were just mentioning a breakdown of natural gas. Does that include natural gas being used for generation?
Yeah, the law actually specifies that, let's see, 70% of all electricity production in New York has to be renewable by 2030, and 100% of electricity has to be fossil fuel free in New York by 2040. That's specified in the law, quite beyond our implementation plan. And we will certainly meet those goals. New York is on course to greatly reduce its use of natural gas in electric generation quickly, through a combination of offshore wind, onshore wind, some solar, and also importing more Quebec hydro.
Well, thank you very much. Any other committee questions for Professor Howard? All right, so thanks again. Look forward to looking at the testimony you're sending and chasing down some of the information that you've provided through links.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm not exactly clear on your rules and regulations, but in the past, I've seen Mr. Duvall at the end ask questions and make comments, and I have a question.
For the committee?
Yes.
Sure. So I just wanted to make sure that we're not holding Professor Howard if
Okay, thank you.
it was not a question to him. So thanks, Professor. And if we have other questions, maybe we follow up with you.
That would be great. I'm easy to reach by email and happy to talk.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you. So my question is, Senator White said that her responsibility was to address the needs of the fuel dealers in her area. So something to that effect, correct? And so if you do that, will you be using the social equity probing questions to ask, is this fair to all Vermonters?
Well, I'll let Senator White respond for herself, and then I have a comment as well. So I
Okay.
don't know if you have anything like. Okay, so the design of the bill, there's two places I think where we're really looking. Well, this committee did a lot of work last year on the environmental justice bill. We know that whole lens and sensibility to looking at the work of government across the board, not just in energy sphere, is a work in progress, and there is but maybe decades of centuries of ways of doing things, and ways of thinking about things that need to be reconsidered and voices brought to the table. So I want to be humble about how far we've made progress, for instance, through the environmental justice bill. In this bill, we have an equity group or council, built into it in order to our best effort at trying to make sure that while this program operates, and I'm anticipating if it passes and stood up and operates successfully, it'll be running for at least 3 decades. So there will be continual evaluation and improvement along the way. The inclusion of the equity council is our way of building into that process
And
and connection to people that we wouldn't necessarily hear from otherwise.
thank you. And so will they be using the newly created social equity probing questions?
So I'm not sure I know precisely what you mean by that. So I just,
Well, the Social Equity Caucus
yeah,
created a series of equity probing questions and asked every chair in the House to use them on every legislative bill. And also, they want the Senate to use it, but the Senate is walking to a different drum.
okay.
So I want to know how you can address that.
So clearly I've talked with people about things, but I haven't seen a formal proposal. Like, here are the questions, here's how we suggest you use them.
Yeah.
Here's how we suggest we build them into the process. So maybe when we finish today, I can connect with you one-on-one, and you can help connect me to those resources.
Yeah. I mean, I read them off today as I
Yeah.
went along,
Okay.
so they're embedded in my text.
Okay.
But there has been a year's consideration into creating those social equity probing questions with in mind that each committee would use them.
Well, so thank you for doing your part to bring them to us and helping us. This committee at heart is a learning committee, so we never pretend that we know everything. And I want to say that we come in here to look. Some people ask what it's like. I say it's like going to school again, to be in the legislature.
Except that we have to write laws as though we didn't know everything.
Well, I'm a K-12 teacher, so it's kind of the same thing. I have to write classroom rules too.
Yeah. Senator McCollum.
A constituent who's actually visiting with us today emailed me a fairly long list of suggested revisions to this bill pertaining to equity. And I forwarded it to everyone. I have just been looking for my own copy, which is in my emails. And I've got to say, the Professor Howard's fans have so thoroughly clogged my email collection that I was not able to find it. But I will continue to look for it.
Well,
And
I can
but-
send it back to you.
Oh, you have, and I want, if not today, and I presume you don't want to vote the bill out today, you want to start markup.
No.
At some point, I would like us to take a look at those suggestions. And if worse comes to worse, we'll fix it in the House. But one way or another, that as this bill progresses, that we consider.
Although personally, I like to think about anything we're voting out as The next stop is the floor. The stop after that is the governor's desk, even if it needs to go to the house in between, which I fully recognize. All right,
We're not supposed to call it the house, it's the other
the other
body.
body, all right, existential crisis, we have two bodies. So with that, I'd like to wrap up this segment. So for everyone who came in this morning, you're welcome to stay. We're going to sit down with council and look at a draft of the bill and then so people know the bigger schedule over the next week plus, we'll be reviewing sections of the bill, looking at testimony we've received, maybe taking additional testimony as questions pop up, and doing what we refer to as markup, otherwise known as editing in the rest of the world. But we'll be editing the bill in the next 10 days. The goal is to have a bill ready to take out on committee by a week from this Friday. So, and that's our overarching schedule. So thank you all for coming. I'll just pause for a minute in case people want to get up and leave before we start with our council.
Oh, it started.
Professor Howard.
No, my question. No, my question.
No, not yet.
The 2800s.
Jude also, I think it.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, I forgot to ask.
He sent it to us.
Yeah.
I didn't realize. So maybe easy.
Oh,
Got some rewriting.
Yeah.
Tried to do it, so I didn't-
No, unfortunately. She's still like half working, I think she's still up today.
Go ahead.
So we should be good.
Anyway, yeah, you asked for language.
you did.
No, absolutely.
So I don't know what, if any of that's possible.
Yeah, be careful what you ask for.
One.
All right.
Anyway, bye-bye.
Thank you, James.
Okay, so we are still live, right?
Correct.
Great, okay. With that, I'd like to say hello to Mr. Chakowski again. It's been a little while since we actually sat down and read through the bill after weeks of testimony. Love to have you give us a guided tour of what will be a, so we'll do our edits as a strike ball, as in, yeah, exactly. And the reason for that is because the number of changes, if they were recorded as individual amendments, would be astoundingly long and difficult to place in context. So it's a lot easier to just do a strike ball on the full bill, and then our process is to highlight changes so that as they flow in, people can see them. It makes it easier to appreciate what's changing. And then as we adopt them, the highlight goes away and all the new highlighting shows up the next day or two, whatever. So with all that preamble, the draft we have, I believe, is what we're going to be working from, is draft number 1.1, dated 2/7/23, timestamp 7:51 p.m. Thank you. And so that's the right version.
1.1. We're working on strike home.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
You may have it on your.
It was on your desk as of this morning. So let me pause for a moment. Have people
Sorry.
engage in some,
We got a lot of hand.
Yeah,
Here
so-
it is.
what do you call it when you're digging in a archaeological site?
Mining.
Excavating, or there's a word. Appropriate word. We're digging for artifacts. So
I haven't taken anything off my desk.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So yes, we are looking at a strike. Also, we're not looking at, that's not it. We're not looking at, it's this, yeah. So it's got the intro language. It is 1.1 from 7:51 p.m. And,
And when was
if
this
you-
handed out?
This
it was
morning.
handed out this morning.
Well,
Yeah, I'll print that.
Yeah.
yeah, I haven't removed anything from my desk this morning. I don't think it ever came.
I could have snagged it just for follow you. Okay, we
So
can share.
we will get you another copy.
But I think it should be posted
Or
on
a
our
first
the
copy,
website
whichever it
also.
comes out to be. I think it might be at the bottom of that pile.
There it is.
There it is.
That would be it. All right, so now everyone's got it.
Yeah.
Let's start.
Yes, and it's posted on your website today under my name. Actually, Senator Gray, I feel like I interrupted you. Did you want to say anything about what we have in front of us?
Yeah, thanks. So we have, as we've worked, there have been some point edits that seem to me to be relatively non-controversial, and clarifications, improvements in language, specificity, or technical for the most part, but not entirely. So, but I don't want to assume anything about how other people might view those changes. So every change is highlighted so that they're nothing, assuming nothing, but in order to sort of prime the pump and get us going, they're highlighted that way. The other thing is procedurally, because it's, a 34-page bill, I thought that for our first visit again with this, with Mr. Kowski, that we would just do a read through, so we could get the whole, see the bill for the first time in weeks as a whole, and then we'll double back and start doing, section by section edits to the bill. So that's to suggest that if you have edits you'd like to bring forward, I'm just giving you a heads up that I don't know that we'll begin that today, but it might be that tomorrow we start to pool our edits as a committee as we move through, second and third. Now, thank you for that reminder about the preamble.
Yes. I'll also add, so I am scheduled here today, tomorrow, and Friday. So lots of time. The other thing I would just specifically add is you will notice, I think, many of the highlighted pieces of language are actually from the PUC's point at red line or blue line. So that's where most of them come from. There are a couple specific that I'll point out that were sort of clarifications also from me for legal clarity, but those are also just a handful. So
Now
yes.
you remind me a little more. So
Yes.
the reason that most of the PC stuff is in there was, we said, we gave them a design, the policy that we wanted to be implemented. And then my offer / request to them was, we want you to succeed in implementing it. So when it comes to implementation, that I basically will be deferential about, as you're the ones who are gonna have to administer the program, please make suggestions to us that you believe will help you be more effective administrators. And so that's why I said, well, let's put those in because we asked for them. Okay. Thank you again.
So, so we'll start on page 1. Page 1 doesn't have any changes, but just to remind you, section 1 is the short title, which is the Affordable Heat Act. Section 2 is the finding section, and these are largely unchanged from the introduction. There are references to Vermont's requirements to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions under the Global Warming Solutions Act to specific levels by 2025, 2030, and 2050, and that this legislation came from a recommendation from the Vermont Climate Council. And then on page 2, there is an additional new finding that was proposed by the PUC. So it's highlighted in yellow. It's number 6 at the bottom of page 2. So it reads, Vermonters have an unprecedented opportunity to invest in eligible clean heat measures with funding from new federal laws, including the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021 and the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. And so because this is markup and these changes are in yellow, this is a proposal for inclusion. Still plenty of time if you want to amend or disagree. But this was a proposal from the PUC, and I think you heard from a few of your witnesses that the Inflation Reduction Act was a significant change that happened at the federal level, so it's been included in the findings of this bill, if you'd like to.
Yeah, Senator Watson.
Excuse me, process question, since I have never done this quite exactly like this.
Congratulations,
Yeah.
Marta. Yay.
So, are we as a committee discussing each of these proposed changes, or are we doing an overview and then discussing them
Yeah, so what I
as a whole? Or,
I propose that we, for the sake of hearing the narrative sort of as a whole, that we roll through the whole bill
okay,
and then we'll make multiple passes back to go discuss each flag item.
okay,
And then we'll also, there's things that may not be flagged at all that are on your list for reconsideration and stuff like that. So we'll do that as well.
Yeah, but if you have a question on this, I think we could do that.
Like, why is it here?
Yeah.
Or where did it come from?
Yes, yes. So the next change is on page 3. So page 3 starts section 3 of the bill, which is the primary statutory changes to Title 30, where the clean heat standard will live in statute. So the first change is on line 4, and this is in the intent section. So this is actually a suggestion from me, a legal suggestion. So it's adding this intro language that is pursuant to 2 VSA 205A is the intent of the General Assembly Act. So this is a very sort of minor point, I think, but I don't know if your committee specifically has discussed this, Senator Bright, or if just LCAR has discussed it, but recently LCAR has been having discussions regarding when they receive a rule, one of the things that they review specifically in the rule is whether it meets the legislative intent or not. And so originally, you included this provision in 8121 regarding intent to have a signal to LCAR and the PUC, but including LCAR, what the intent of this bill is and what they should look for. And so the specific language in statute that directs legislative committees to include legislative intent for LCAR review is 2 VSA 205A. And so this, I think LCAR has been having discussions lately that having this sort of signal flag of like, here's where we intend for you to look. So it isn't essential, but it will be helpful for LCAR potentially.
Sort of, I'd say, good bill hygiene. And since Senator McDowell and I serve on LCAR, I was just particularly aware of how difficult it can be for LCAR to fish out intent from a larger bill. So that's why we have the intent section. And now LCAR just wrote to every chair in the building and said, please do this. So now we also are saying pursuant to 2 VSA 205A, and it's just to let people know that we were listening and this, we're connecting. Thank you.
Okay, so the other change in this section is on line 7. This was a proposal from the PUC, and so it adds subsections 2 and 3 to the cross-reference. And so what this is saying is that the clean heat standard is supposed to be designed and implemented to meet the greenhouse gas emissions reductions necessary to meet the requirements of 10 VSA 578A, and specifically 2 and 3 refer to the year goals of 2030 in number 2, and then 2050 in number 3. And this is just to be specific that the clean heat standard will not be in effect for the 2025 goal, which is number 1. So number 1 is being excluded. So that specifically they will not need to be working towards that goal since it will have already passed.
Right.
It's
The
not.
program rolling out if passed by 2026. So, okay. Thank you.
Yes. So the next section is 8122, which is the section that lays out a lot of the primary elements of the clean heat standard. The first change isn't until the next page, But this is sort of laying out the basic elements, which is the obligated parties must reduce their greenhouse gas emissions with clean heat credits. It directs the PUC to adopt a credit system by rule or order. Then on page 4, it states how the obligated parties will have different options for meeting their reduction requirements through the use of doing clean heat measures themselves, contracting for those measures, purchasing credits, or using the default delivery agent. The next major change though is on page 4 in subsection D. So this is this yellow language was proposed by the PUC. So it's in regards to rules and the use of orders. So the commission shall adopt rules and may issue orders to implement and enforce the Clean Heat Standard program. The requirement to adopt rules does not in any way impair the commission's authority to issue orders or take any other actions both before and after final rules take effect to implement and enforce the Clean Heat Standard. The commission's rules may include a provision that allows the commission to revise its Clean Heat Standard rules by order of the commission without the revisions being subject to the rulemaking requirements of 3 VSA Chapter 25, provided the commission provides notice of any proposed changes, allows for a 30-day comment period, and responds to all comments received on the proposed change. Any order shall be subject to appeal to the Vermont Supreme Court under Section 12 of this title, and the commission must immediately file any orders and a red line and clean version of the revised rules with the Secretary of State, with notice simultaneously provided to the House committees and the Senate committees. So this language, I do think the PUC went over with you when they were in here, but so there's a couple of things happening, and I think largely this is clarifying what was already implicit, but you have directed the PUC at the end of this bill to adopt rules. The PUC also frequently adopts orders, which don't go through the strict procedural steps of a rule. And so this is allowing them to both before and after adopt orders in addition to the rules they will be adopting. But it is providing specific requirements that those orders need to have a 30-day comment period and then be subject to appeal to the Supreme Court. And they will have to provide the red line and the clean version to the Secretary of State and the committees.
I just to explain sort of from my point of view, talking with the PUC as they were preparing and with council, that they wanted the nimbleness of being able to do some things through order, which while the heart of the program is designed through formal rulemaking. Because there's less of it's a less lengthy, less formal process to writing an order than to writing a rule. We asked them to include a provision that explicitly included a 30-day comment period, a requirement to respond to all comments, and then that orders are subject to appeal. So people would know that, and with notice to the legislature. So it's a balancing act. It's trying to give them the flexibility to adjust things, as well as make sure that the public is engaged and informed. Public and the legislature is engaged and informed.
And so I would just give like as an example, and they haven't used this as an example, but it's something I have been thinking about. The rules are in theory going to go into effect in late 2025, early 2026. In the meantime, this bill does provide for early action credits. And so the PUC may consider issuing an order, which they could do fairly quickly, to address what kind of records or something would need to be kept for these early action credits, which are something that will be happening while they're developing the primary rule. So that to me seems like an example of how they could use an order before the rule takes effect. I'm not saying that they are proposing to do that, but it strikes me as an area where there's a gap in the time.
Is there a clear line and already understood in when an order is appropriate as opposed to a rule and when you want to do, or is there a gray area?
No, I think it's gray. I mean, obviously, at the end of this bill, you have very specific provisions that nearly all of the language contemplated in this bill needs to appear in the order. But I think that this program has a significant number of different dimensions besides the clean heat program. And so, like, in addition to what I just said about early action credits, generally the credit system itself, establishing that system, later in the bill, it does say by rule or order, they could do the credit system. So there's also been discussion about different enforcement or compliance mechanisms that may need to be used. There was another one I thought of this. There's different, besides the actual emission reductions that are happening, there are a couple of other parts of this program that could be used, could be developed in order.
Well, yeah, what I'm getting at is that I understand the need for nimbleness. The rulemaking process is cumbersome. Time-consuming. Legislation more so. So you want the administrators to be able to make decisions and get things going. But on the other hand, there is that whole idea that they're supposed to only implement the rules. And the rules are supposed to only implement the law. Otherwise, they're not just making decisions, they're making law without having been elected.
So I'm not sure I agree with that characterization because the PUC has already been given the authority to adopt order, and you have been specific in this bill that you want them to primarily use rules. So I guess, but the bill does also say in a few places by rule or order. And so if your intent is different than rule or order, it would be, you would need to make sure that that's clear.
Wording that language, yeah. Does the rest of the committee feel comfortable with it? We're delegating a certain amount of discretion, which maybe we should. I mean, but it's no small thing.
Senator McDonald.
We have a history of putting things into rule and giving the PUC the authority to order that the lawful rule be followed.
Yeah,
That's not new.
but this is the phrasing rule or order, so they can do stuff without putting it into rule. They can just order it. Or can they? That's what I'm asking.
We, when the legislature says it's okay for a specific matter, a specific concern, that's possible. Should I go back to the PUC was reviewing net metering procedures and rules, and we in this committee directed the PUC to complete their proposed rules by a certain date, so that the legislature, when the legislature met, the legislature could take a look at what was proposed and intervene if the legislature thought it was appropriate. We also included that were the legislature, were the report from the PUC to be made available, and there was not enough time to write the rules to make the report work, we authorized the PUC to have it, make it work by order. And our intention was that there might be a time gap to get this thing done by the end of the year, so we authorized the PUC to implement it by order. Well, as it played out, the PUC never delivered the report to the legislature, so the legislature didn't have time to review it and to intervene. And then the PUC went and issued that it happened by order. And we screamed bloody murder in here, in this committee, and said, wait a minute. Yeah, the whole purpose has been, seems to run amok. And Elcar said that the orders and the rules were inappropriate, which meant that they were gonna have to go, there was gonna be some court issues. So the utilities all came in and said, well, we already issued the order, and we've changed all our computers, and the computer change would cost this much to change it back again. And the Natural Resources Committee is being picky about this, blah, 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 blah. That's what we were in that year. And the PUC was able to write rules and implement them by order without Elcar having any blah, blah, blah. Got pushed off on the back bench. So that's our history. Mentioned the other time that I recall for a similar thing happened was back with the 10-acre loophole for septic systems. No one wished to, there was reluctance to change the law because Addison County had a lot of clay. And who knew what the rules would do? They put people out of business and mess up homeowners in Addison County. So the law said the rules for getting rid of the 10-acre loophole had to be written and presented so the legislature could intervene. And the rules were written, and the legislature and this committee took testimony and debated the rules and tweaked them here and there, and the 10-acre loophole was eliminated. So that's the history of preempting rulemaking and orders and the legislature. Sometimes it's a good idea. In the case of the loophole and the case of the net metering rules, this senator believes the PUC ran amok and did what they were not permitted to do. And nothing happened.
So are you for this language or against
Makes sense.
it? What's that?
This makes sense.
All right, so
But you should keep in mind where it's likely to get sticky, you know, whether someone would try to take advantage of it for purposes that we didn't intend.
I used to teach this stuff and it's so frustrating to me how often I see we do stuff that's, oh, that's not what I told them.
so
I mean, be so long-winded, Mr. Chair.
now that
This is touchy stuff.
so having lived through that last experience, no, not the 10-acre, the net metering stuff or an order around how net meter was treated. This bill is, crafted to maximize our opportunity to receive a timely rule and have a full legislative session to respond to that rule. And if that rule were not forthcoming, I think the legislature is also in a position to act appropriately at that time to ensure that
To intervene.
Yeah, so I'd say experiences where the bill, I would just land on, the bill tries to be prudent about, sort of a trust but verify mentality or something like that. And as we work through where you see by rule or order, that's not requirements, you might want to flag those and we could reconsider that along the way. But there's a certain amount of flexibility built in, and that phrase will show up from time to time. Okay,
Okay.
so I don't think we're gonna finish our walkthrough today.
Well, just hurry up.
I'm not trying to hurry us along. That's a big, it's a really important issue. It's fundamental for the bill, so thanks.
So page 5 has the definition section. There's a couple of changes to the definition of clean heat measure, but otherwise the other definitions here are the same. So clean heat measure means fuel delivered and technologies installed to end-use customers in Vermont that reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the thermal sector. So first, previously it read fuel and technologies delivered and installed. So that was a grammar change around me, okay, well, in the chair. And then the phrase "from the thermal sector" was a clarification that came from the PUC. And so I think that clarity works. Next, there's on line 11, clean heat measures shall not include switching from one fossil fuel use to another fossil fuel use. The commission may adopt a list of acceptable actions that qualifies clean heat measures. So this sentence that's highlighted is the language that was in H 715. It is slightly different than the language that was there previously.
I would just say that I had requested this, it was just to revert to the language as in the passed bill last year.
Sorry, can you just say that where we're?
Page 5, line 11. Clean heat measures, yeah.
So that's how we phrased it before, and we can.
Yes.
We can come back to it, but I just want to say,
Thank you.
where does it come from?
Yep.
Because that's the,
Yep.
how we expressed it on the bill pass.
Yep, great, thank you.
Yes, certainly not.
The yellow is new language that's been added in.
Yes.
There's been other language that's been removed.
Yes, this sentence that's in yellow, so most of the changes are either new language or switching a word. This sentence wholly replaced a previous sentence.
So many people would spend a lot of time going through the language in the bill that's been proposed. And the yellow signals to them there's new language in there. There's nothing that signals to them what has been removed.
There isn't a strikeout, yes. It doesn't, yeah.
Sometimes strikeouts are equally important to many of our constituents as what has been put in there that's new. And traditionally, people who read this stuff expect to see what has been stricken. So, sure.
Are you asking me to include strikeout?
So, but maybe the committee will think about that.
So is that, there are places where there are very small point edits, but I take your point. Sometimes you want to say, well, what did it used to say? So for those kinds of edits, is there a way for you to insert with a strikeout through it? So we'll see old and new.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Senator Watson.
I just want to observe that there is a place where some language is removed and you have a highlight next to it.
I do, yes, so I did that
So-
also, but the language isn't there.
Right, the language isn't there, but I just wanted at least to flag that there's a note that something has changed.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
If it helps, I have that language here, and your sentence just adds the word use after both fossil fuel. So,
Thank you. All right, so let's continue our tour.
So the rest of the section has the other definitions that have been provided in the bill as introduced. I suspect you're going to want to discuss them, but right now am I only focusing on the yellow?
I guess,
Okay.
I know we're gonna look at everything.
So the next change is on page 6. This is down on line 17. So 8124 clean heat standard compliance. So the required amounts, the commission shall establish the amount of clean heat credits that each obligated party is required to retire each calendar year. The word amount has replaced the word number for readability. I think this was a question from the chair. So it was establish the number of clean heat credits when actually it's going to be a percentage. So amount is perhaps more clear, but right, I think that was your request and not the PUC. But so anyways. And then further down on that page again, throughout this bill, every time there is a reference to 10 VSA 578, the specific references to 2 and 3 have been added at the request of the PUC. Okay, so on page 7, line 5, so the annual requirement shall be expressed, oh, so sorry, so there's yellow here, and so 2 things have happened. This, the sentence that starts on line 3 has been broken into 2 sentences for readability. So the annual requirements shall be expressed as a percent of each obligated party's contribution to the thermal sector's life cycle CO2e emissions in the previous year. Start of a new sentence. The annual percentage shall be the same for all obligated parties. I think this was a request from the chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it was made into 2 sentences. Yes. So then again, further down on this page, on line 14, again, in reference to 2 and 3 have been added. Next on page 8. Now we're in the section about registration. So each entity that sells heating fuel into or in Vermont shall register annually with the commission by an annual deadline established by the commission. The first registration deadline is January 31st, 2024, and the annual deadline shall remain January 31st of each year unless a different deadline is established by the commission. So the highlighted language is a new piece of language that was requested by the PUC. They wanted a date certain by which the first registration should be completed.
I think the 2024 date was to give them a running start on 2025. Yes, it was going to involve hearing from people from whom they traditionally haven't heard in the past. They wanted to stand up that list of obligated parties with a fight getting started early on.
Yes, so then next, down on line 13, so this section lists the information that parties need to register with the PUC. And so there's a small change on line 13. The prior draft said type of heating fuel sold, but I think that you have heard recently that businesses often sell multiple types of fuel, and so it is now types, plural. Line 17 has new language that was requested by the PUC, and you'll see some complementary language that has been added at the end of the bill as well. So the Department of Taxes shall annually provide a list of entities that pay the fuel tax pursuant to 33 VSA 2503 A1 and 2.
I have a question.
Yes.
Senator McDonald's flagged something for, we were talking about how much discretion the PUC has and how it's given to them. So those lines we just went over 3 through 5 on top of page 8, if they can establish a different deadline. We don't say anything about how they do that. And so is that by rule, by order, or do they have discretion that's outside of rules and orders?
I don't, outside of rule or order, I think that it would be in the rule. It could be perhaps modified by order, especially because this is clearly starting before the rule would go into effect. But if you'd like to specify, you can.
Well, that's when we get jammed up on the own.
So maybe we could check with the PC about just adding the by rule or order. This one to me seems like it's very likely by order, right? Because it's the explanation we heard was we want to start early, we want to have this date, there won't be a rule yet. We need to be able to get going. And then as they run the program, they might well say, you know what, that date needs to be moved up or moved back, because it will help us get timely registrations or something like that, you know. So could you propose language that would put it into, just be more explicit about how that?
Do you want rule or order? Is that what you just?
I would say,
Or
Well, legislature can always intervene and do it by statute. Change the date by statute.
Great.
So,
Maybe we'll think about that.
okay, so why don't we put in new language by rule of order, and we'll flag that as well. And we'll keep the question alive in front of us. Thank you, Senator McDonald.
Digging a little deeper. Is there anyone else we could entrust this work to other than the PUC?
Me,
Well, no, what if, I'm
me.
with all respect, first, these are a couple of personal friends here. I have nothing against the PUC, but their public utilities regulation traditionally has been about guaranteeing reliability and regulating price. It has not been about the environment. If that's their orientation, if that's their.
Can I?
Excellent questions, and that's something we need to decide and maybe think about. If you don't, unless you want me.
We don't need to decide. No, I can do it better than you. We don't need to decide now, but I would like us to think about that. And I don't know if there's anyone else who can. So I'm not actually suggesting we not, but it does seem to me that the PUC's mandate is to guarantee reliability at a reasonable price, which is a good thing. But there's also this other stuff, which is, it's kind of like asking AOT to.
If they want to change the speed limit.
Yeah.
So, the thing that comes to mind about the breadth of the work they do, when I think of Efficiency Vermont, which they've had oversight of for the last 22 years, they have their eye on things like climate mitigating measures in the form of reduced electrical consumption.
Okay, that's an answer. I didn't mean that question rhetorically. It's something I just wanted to.
And I would also add that they're the ones who currently administer the RES. So beyond the regulation of utilities, which is primarily their work, they also administer the RES, which is a performance-based system. And they issue permits under that system, not only to utilities, but also to other developers who establish electrical generation facilities.
All right. Thank you.
Well, so now we need to talk about the very important language on line 17, which is the data, which is getting at the data question. And so I already previewed, there's additional language at the end, but this is sort of the first flag that is tying the Department of Tax to provide the data to the PUC to help them get the list of people paying fuel tax.
Or list of people who should be paying.
Well, presumably they'll only have the list of people that are paying, and then perhaps they can figure out who else.
Okay.
Next, on page 9, there on line 8, there's another edition of that date of January 31st, 2024. So for entities not registered on or before January 1st, 2024, the first registration form shall be due 30 days after the first sale of heating fuel to a location in Vermont. Next, on page 11. So now we're switching topics. This is related to this is the section related to equitable distribution of clean heat measures. And so in this section, subsection 5 on page 11, the commission has the authority to change the percentages of credits that need to come from low and moderate income customers, and the criteria used to define who are customers with low income and moderate income. And it says for good cause after notice and opportunity for public process. So there's language that's been added on line 7 through 9 because there previously wasn't an explanation of what good cause was. And so it reads, good cause may include a shortage of clean heat credits or undue adverse financial impact on particular customers or demographic segments. This language is identical to language that is previously on page, it's on a prior page where we reference what good cause is. And so it's been added here just to be clear as well. You could potentially consider different criteria for good cause, but,
And I think part of the reason was when you read something for good cause, it begs the question, what's good cause? So we had a sentence that gives examples, and because it's may, it's not exclusive, so they could come up with other reasons that constitute good cause. But this was to help empower people reading to say, okay, here's the kinds of things they might be evaluated.
yes. All right, so the next change is on page 12. And it is regarding the default delivery agent. So, so this language came from the PUC. So the commission shall designate the default delivery agent. The default delivery agent shall be a single statewide entity capable of providing a variety of clean heat measures. I'm trying to remember what that said previously, but sorry, so I'll look up in a minute what that change was previously, but the entity selected as the default delivery agent may also be a market participant and shall not be an obligated party. The designation of an entity under this subdivision may be by order of appointment or contract. A designation, whether by order of appointment or by contract, may only be issued after notice and opportunity for hearing. An order of appointment shall be for a limited duration, not to exceed 12 years, although an entity may be reappointed by order or contract. An order of appointment may include any conditions and requirements that the commission deems appropriate to promote the public good. For good cause, after notice and opportunity for hearing, the commission may amend or revoke an order of appointment. And so this is changing or adding at least more specificity as to what goes into the hiring or the designation of the, oh, I remember, okay, the default delivery agent. So the number 1 is highlighted because this was the request from Senator Watson to move to switch paragraph 1 and 2 for readability. So that was a request just for readability to rearrange these paragraphs.
The bulk of this new language, is this either verbatim or just modeled on the language we use for the appointment of the statewide energy efficiency utility?
I don't know that.
It sounds familiar to me, and I thought, well, maybe this is how we express creating the energy efficiency utility that, you know, and it was efficiency or not that awarded.
I can look, but I don't know that to be true. Yes, and so part of this language also replaces a couple of the phrases that were in the prior version that reference contracting for a multi-year period through a competitive procurement process. And so this was the PUC's suggestion on how that process would be defined.
You saw on page 11, 106.
Page
Page 12.
12,
I'm still-
7 to 16.
You're not far behind. You got good notes there, so.
All right,
I checked. Page 11, but that's for later.
You check.
so the right to object. Okay, we'll keep going. Top of page 13, I think.
On the top of page 3, this is also a suggestion from the PUC, but I think it adds clarity to something that was possibly already implicit. So so this is when the default delivery agent would be used, and it's an obligated party chooses to assign its annual requirement in full or in part to the default delivery agent. So clarifying that is
There's
true.
not an all or nothing proposition.
And obviously that's a policy choice, so something for you to consider, but I thought that was already implicit, but this is making it very clear. So the next change is on page 14. So at the top of page 14, we're talking about the enforcement language here. So on line 1, the commission shall order an obligated party that fails to retire their clean heat credits, including the low and moderate income credits, to make a non-compliance payment to the default delivery agent. So in S5 as introduced, that was a may. And so the PUC requested that it be a shall. Yes, there are trouble damages. So additionally on page 14, down on line 12, this subsections 4 and 5 were requested by the PUC. So the commission's enforcement authority does not in any way impede the enforcement authority of other entities, such as the Attorney General's office. In addition to any other applicable penalties and remedies, failure to register with the commission as required by this section is a per se violation of this section and the Vermont Consumer Protection Act's prohibition on unfair and deceptive practices. The fact that an entity may not have known it was required to register with the commission shall not be a defense.
So
the PUC had told us that they didn't think, it was the Attorney General that then said that we didn't need this, but the PUC still wanted it.
So I think the PUC testified first, and then the Attorney General's office came in and said that this may not be necessary. I think that while it is probably true that this is redundant language, I do think it's very clear language. And so I think you previously may have heard testimony that there was some, I think it was some testimony, but concern about whether or not actually registering was a violation that could be enforced against. So this is very clear. And so while the Attorney General's office may not need it to enforce, I think that this is a very clear legal statement about what is a violation of this act. So you don't have to keep it if you don't want to, but this is very clear information.
Thank you. I, per usual, trust your counsel on this matter.
Right, I think I don't know if you've had a chance to do this, sort of the dotting the I crossing the T part from my perspective was just to have run this past the AG's office again and say, does this in any way somehow cause issues for you? Or whether, even if you don't think it's necessary to say it, is it, as long as it doesn't cause an issue like conflicting statute or something like that, or conflicting process, it makes the bill more and more readable. Someone called it user-friendly. When we spell things out explicitly, as opposed to having someone chase down things that are implicit, it's just helpful.
Well, on the other hand, there was the controversy years ago about shall include but not be limited to. That shall include means shall not be limited to. That's part of the legal definition of shall include. And by saying what shall not be limited to causes confusion, because then the question is, if it doesn't say shall not be limited to. So that was a big thing here a couple of years. Charlie Bristow just about that. And I think it's sort of like people not exercising their right of way at a fork stuff. But they do, they create confusion. They're not being nice, they're creating. So I would go with the term language.
So I would also add that we'll see as we get later, and I did remove the separate section on consumer protection violations in lieu of including it here. So I do think that you should consider whether or not it is apparent that violating the clean heat standard is a violation of the Consumer Protection Act. So I do think the Attorney General's office knows what they're doing in that respect. But you have the option either way. If you don't want to include it, you can take it out. But
Well,
This is a very new area of law.
if the committee disagrees with me, I'm not gonna storm out in the stick.
Just go on.
So when time allows, can you just double check with the AGs? So if we were to keep it, are we in any way confusing things? As opposed to just being more explicit. I won't use, since I made up the word confusing, let me say it.
Don't encourage him to use that word. No, don't encourage him.
We're putting that in statute.
As long as we're not running afoul of provisions already in the AG's, the body of law related to the operations of the AG's office, that I would just like to know the answer to that question. If not, we can decide as a committee, do we want to keep it in or take it out? So with that,
Some morning in May at 3:00 in the morning, when you're still working, you're gonna type confusingly.
No, I am not. It's not gonna happen, but it may end up on a draft on my desk.
Senator McGowan.
Apologize for being mentally somewhere else for a moment. Back to the triple damages. Does anyone in government have the authority to waive that triple damage according to statute?
So they do inherently have enforcement discretion. And the prior version added like clear discretion. And so I do think inherently they have discretion in how they enforce specifically.
We'll hear from the PUC.
Does that answer your question?
So it might be triple damages.
Yeah. Well, it is supposed to be triple damages, unless they decide to not do that.
Who's they?
The PUC.
You know, this would be, I'd say, why don't we have the PUC explain why that they had inherent discretion. I don't know how it's expressed elsewhere, but we raised the point of what if someone, the checks in the mail sort of a thing that gets delayed in the mail, filing's late, do they automatically have to do triple damages? And the answer was no, they have discretion. But we don't spell out the terms of how that discretion is applied.
Well, sometimes we say they can, the money can go to the Boys and Girls Club or something like that.
Oh.
All right, so I'll mark my copy to ask the PUC to explain a little bit more from that one. Thank you.
On page 15, there's a small change on line 5. This is to reflect that the House Committee's name has changed. It's now Environment and Energy. And then on line 11, this is the annual report after the Clean Heat Standard has been adopted. In the prior bill, as introduced, the date of the report was due August 31st of each year, and the PUC has requested that it be due January 5th of each year following. I think they expressed concern that there would be not enough time to produce a report in 8 months after the calendar year has closed. All right, so the next change is on page 17, and it's under the list of eligible clean heat measures. There are 2 changes that are proposed. So one is on line 10. There was discussion about what a controlled electric water heater was. I'm still not entirely sure, but the word utility, adjective utility has been added there. So a utility controlled electric water heater. However, you may want to take testimony if that is the proper word.
Does that make it more clear?
I hope so, but I didn't hear testimony that used a different word. So if there's a different word.
And so I'll fess up that, this previous version bothered me all the way along. It's like it said a controlled just a controlled electric water heater. I don't know of any water heater on the planet that's not controlled. So there must be something more meaningful than that to say. And I think the advantage to managing our energy use is when a utility can in some way manage a hot water heater to address things like peak load when they're doing load shedding and stuff like that. So this may or may not, it's just a bit of a guess, but it's in there so that we'll get testimony and say, what really does this mean? Because the original phrase seemed kind of meaningless.
So the next change is on line 13, and number 7 is highlighted because the previous number 7 has been deleted. And this was requested by the PUC, but I think it also came up other times as well. So if the language previously read, renewable electricity systems paired with heat pumps or electric appliances, providing thermal end uses, including on-site and community scale renewable electricity systems.
Short of it was, the renewable energy component really didn't have much to do with the appliance, for instance, we're interested in. And all the appliances that this renewable energy system might be connected to are in our list, or can be added to the list because it's a includes kind of a list.
Thank you, Chairman Bray. I think I was the one who was most concerned about getting rid of that bit, and I feel more comfortable with it in case anyone was wondering.
So let's, there's a couple of very small edits, and then let's stop.
Yes. Yeah, so on page 19, again, the cross-reference specifically to 2 and 3 of 578A has been added.
And
then on page 20, on the section on credit eligibility down on line 16, all eligible clean heat measures that are delivered in Vermont beginning on January 1, 2023 shall be eligible. That phrase is used earlier in the bill, but this was proposed by the PUC, I think, just for consistency. And then the next change, so eligible clean heat measures may be retired and count towards emission reduction obligations, regardless of who creates or delivers them, and regardless of whether their creation or delivery was required or funded in whole or in part by other state policies and programs. And so this also was requested by the PUC, and I do think it is also further clarifying.
My understanding is that the PUC recommended language that said by other federal or state policy programs, and the word federal is not in there.
Oh, well, it's possible I just missed it, or it's possible I was thinking that it was implicit. And I genuinely can't remember because last night I was here late. So just if you would like to add it,
so let's just flag circling back.
Okay.
And then I'd say we're now 1 minute past 12. So thank you everyone for staying a little extra. Thanks for hanging in for an intense morning of testimony. And we will pick up tomorrow on page 21 and finish our walkthrough.